We're honored to be joined by the Western Regional Vice President of the New York State Correctional Officers and Police Benevolent Association, Mr. Mike Dildine. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well, Bob. Thanks for having me.
You betcha. And again, I apologize for imposing on your schedule and delaying you.
No problem.
Wyoming Correctional Facility, recent days, there's been some stuff going on there, and you've had correctional officers injured. But please tell us what's happened.
Well, on Saturday, we had a couple of incidents at Wyoming. You had an inmate who had been sentenced to 30 days in SHU.
What's that, SHU?
SHU, Special Housing Unit. For violating the rules of the facility, they separate and segregate the inmate, for safety reasons. And then about 15 days into his sentence, he had his time cut, which is becoming an increasing problem with us. His time cut released back to the housing unit.
Why did that happen, sir? Why was his time cut?
Well, what happens is, because of space, and someone else commits a newer offense or a recent offense, they end up giving a time cut to an inmate, releasing him back into population. So what this does is now you have this inmate that was supposed to be serving his sentence at SHU, and he's back on a dorm setting, generally double bunked.
And what does double bunked mean?
Well, right now in the Department of Corrections, we have over 12,000 inmates in double bunk situations. You have two beds, one on top of the other, in a cube that was designed for one in most of the medium facilities throughout the state.
Okay. So this isn't like a cell. It's like a large barrack or dormitory area, and there are little dividers or whatever where one man was supposed to be?
Exactly.
And
exactly. Usually, generally on that housing unit, there's 10 of the actual cubicles are double bunked. Which puts more inmates on, and it's harder for the officers to see what's going on. It creates a much more unsafe condition. So this inmate was released back to the housing unit and given cube confinement, where the officer is supposed to, make sure that the inmate stays in his cube. He's not supposed to go to rec, those sorts of things. And Saturday evening, he noticed him out in the TV room, went and confronted him and asked him to return to his cube. And when he turned away, the inmate assaulted him.
Punched him in the back of the head?
Yeah, punched him in the back of the head. He goes down, struggles with the inmate, pulls his pin, which basically calls for a response. You have another officer respond who ended up getting hurt in the melee as well. A sergeant responds. They finally get the inmate out into the van to take over to the hospital, getting ready to take him back to SHU. And then while getting out of the van, the sergeant ends up with a little bit of struggle with the inmate, ends up hitting the van, going into a seizure, broke his wrist. All three of the two officers and the sergeant ended up being transported to the hospital up in Batavia.
The first officer, first of all, I guess it's an honor system staying in your cube?
Yeah, basically that's it. I mean, you have one officer with 60 inmates, and he's responsible to make sure that this inmate follows the rules. And like I said, because of the situation in SHU, which has become an increasingly larger problem in the department, there are SHU beds available. What happens is you have a facility like Wyoming that has a small SHU, Special Housing Unit. But throughout the state, in our region alone, we have 5 or 6. They're called SHU 200s, where you have 200-bed facilities for SHU inmates with empty cells. It's just docs chooses not to transfer these inmates, and they just cut their time and put them back in the housing unit.
Where is Wyoming Correctional Facility, sir?
Wyoming sits in Attica, New York, right next door to Attica Correctional Facility. Okay.
Attica is like high security, and this is medium security?
Yeah, Attica is a max, and Wyoming is a medium.
Okay. The correctional officer says, you've got to get back to your cube, turns and walks away, and the guy punches him in the back of the head.
Yes.
That correctional officer, it goes down, he has a concussion, and he hurts his knee.
Correct.
And there's another correctional officer who responds, and as he's helping to take this, inmate into custody, whatever you call it, put handcuffs on him, he hurts his back.
Correct.
And then so the inmate has to go to the clinic, the infirmary. Why was that? Was he?
Well, it's always standard procedure, and something like this, the inmate is going to eventually go to SHU again. And before he does that, they're always taken over to the infirmary. They're seen by medical. Their photographs are taken. The inmate's processed, and he's put back in SHU.
Okay, that's just part of the routine processing.
Part of the normal
into that.
process,
Make
correct.
sure that he goes in there in good health or whatever like that.
Exactly.
So if I understand it, he's transported in a van or something. It's raining and wet. It was horrific wet out there on Saturday. The sergeant is on the ground. He opens the van door, and the guy purposely bumps into him or something, knocks him down.
Yeah, that's what was reported to me, yes. That the inmate, again, began to struggle a little bit, wasn't cooperative. The sergeant slips, it was wet, and he ended up hitting his head on the van, going down. A few minutes later, goes into a seizure, taken to the outside hospital. He ends up having a broken wrist.
And another concussion.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. One inmate was able to injure 3 correctional officers.
Yes.
Why was that?
Well, it happens all the time. These are violent inmates. What's happened in our department over the years with the closing of the facilities, which Governor Cuomo's latest request for 4 more will bring up to 15 since he's taken office. You have had inmates that normally would have been in a maximum security setting. But because of the inmate security classification changes by docs, they put these more violent inmates into the mediums. And with the changes, a whole bunch of things have played into this. With the changes of the Rockefeller drug laws, alternatives to incarceration, those sorts of things, those inmates are no longer in the facilities. So what you have a condensing of the more violent inmate in these medium facilities. And then packed on top of that with the double bunking, the staff shortages, we have a much more violent inmate that we have to deal with.
Mike Dildine is the Western Regional Vice President of the New York State Correctional Officers and Police Benevolent Association. 3 correctional officers hurt Wyoming Correctional Facility Saturday evening. Can you hold on a moment, please, sir, and tell us about something that happened after that?
Yes, I can.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much. Important we need to take a break. Important thing to remember is that corrections and the entire industry, whether we're talking the county jail or the state prison like Mr. Dildine represents, those folks are as important a part of keeping our streets safe as police officers or anybody else. The bad guys they're holding are the bad guys who aren't breaking into your house tonight. Back with more Mr. Dildine in half a moment on WHAM 1180.
WHAM 1180, Rochester's news, weather, and traffic station.
Welcome back, friends. We're speaking with Mike Dildine. He's the Western Regional Vice President of the New York State Correctional Officers and Police Benevolent Association, representing primarily correctional officers in New York State prisons. He told us just before the break about an incident Saturday evening, a little after dinner time, where one inmate injured 3 correctional officers in an unfolding incident. 2 of them received concussions, one a broken wrist, I think it was. Mr. Dildine, after that, there ended up being a big fight at the correctional facility. Mr. Dildine?
Yes.
I'm sorry, yeah. We're talking Wyoming Correctional Facility, but after this, there ended up being a fight among the inmates.
Yep, there was another fight a short while later on a different dorm at Wyoming, a 4-man fight where weapons were involved, and 2 inmates were cut and injured in that as well, from what I was told.
This is a dumb question. I'm an outsider. How does an inmate get a weapon, sir?
Well, they make them generally. Lots of things you can make. You can make a weapon out of anything. You can make a weapon. You can break apart your Bic razor that the inmates receive to shave with. You can break plexiglass off of something and to take your time and sharpen it over days and days or months, even on concrete or whatever, and hide it on their person or in their cube. And again, a lot of that goes back to this double bunking issue. With more inmates on the dorms, it's harder for the officers to keep track of everything that's going on. You can't see as well. We've seen a large increase in contraband in the facilities recently.
How often are correctional officers assaulted?
Quite often, actually. There's a disagreement between us, NYSCOBA, and docs, basically on the number of assaults. But per doc's own fact sheet, which they issue, and the latest one came out September 1st, so far this year, we are averaging over 52 assaults on staff a month. And those are reported. We disagree on that number. We think that number is much higher, but these are doc's own numbers. For instance, if you go back to 2012, it was 43 a month. You go back 5 years, which is as far as the report goes back to 2008, we were averaging about 48 assaults on staff a month. Well, what's important to remember is in 2008, we had 6,000 more inmates. So not only are the number of assaults on staff up, the ratio is alarmingly higher than it used to be.
And there are fewer facilities.
Exactly.
So, yeah, gracious. I live in Mount Morris, and there are a lot of correctional officers live there. It's part of our community and such like that. But that's one of the unfortunate realities of that vocation is you go off each day and you don't know what's going to happen.
Well, exactly. You go off for a day. You deal with a tough clientele. You have a job to do. It's dangerous. You signed up for it. Part of our problem or our complaint is that we don't think we're being given the protections we need to be given by the department, by the governor. The double bunking issue has just created a totally unsafe environment in the prisons. The change, there's a whole bunch that's played into it. The change in the MHU laws, the inmates take advantage of that now and realize that, they know how to play the game. They serve less time in isolation. And what all this does, combining with that more violent inmate, is puts them into these dorms, where you have 60 of them crammed in with one officer watching them.
Yeah.
So a much more violent situation than it was a few years ago.
Understanding that you want to get away from the double bunking, which means more facilities or more capacity facilities or more buildings, something like that. In addition to that, what could be done to promote officer safety?
Well, proper staffing. Number one, don't close the post. We have a big problem.
Let me ask you this. And you have to tell us what closing a post means. But one guy watching a room alone always seems dangerous. This initial thing Saturday night started with an officer being punched in the back of the head. That's less likely if you have two officers.
Correct. And if you go back now, I've been doing the job for a little while, so 26 years in the job. When I first began, I worked at downstate, and then I transferred up, and I was at Cayuga, and in Cayuga County over the other side, south of Auburn. Mm-hmm. And worked an afternoon dorm, and I had my inmates, and then they had began double bunking at that time, and I had a rover that would rove in between the dorms. They've done away with all that. Part of staffing cuts is those rovers have gone away, putting more and more on the officers.
More dangerous inmates, concentrated inmates, and fewer officers.
Exactly.
Yeah. And here's the thing: what's the wage range? What's a correctional officer make ballpark?
Now you put me on the spot here. I have to go back and think. I know starting correctional officer starts out somewhere around $35,000 to $40,000 a year. And you work your way up to top rate.